All right, guys, thank you so much for coming out. Tree Fort Day 2, how was day 1 for you guys? Was anybody out? I was. Main stage was wild yesterday. Like literally we checked in over 4,000 people. So it was a good time. Well, I'm Sean Wakely. I'm the director of Hackfort. I want to thank you guys again for coming out today. We have a lot of really fun programming this week. I mentioned this in the last class. Matt Bogue from Houdini, he just did his presentation. They helped us a lot this year at the festival. They have the dome that's over at by main stage. They also helped us add a link in the Treefort app. If you go to the column on the left, there's a link for a photo booth app. It's really, really cool. I recommend you check it out. It's fun to play with. And we're going to have a gallery on our website after the festival of all the photos people take. Anyways, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend and also a roommate, Zach Hawkins. Zach, thank you so much for coming out. Thanks for putting in the time. Happy to have you, bud.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
And and we will have Q&A at the end. And I have an assistant to help pass around the mic because this is getting recorded, so we need to get that on the microphone.
Perfect. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, everybody. I was asked to speak here, and I realized that this is Hackfort, and I more or less come from a very creative background. So a little bit of disclosure, I wasn't sure how many of you were, more on the creative side or more on the technical side. So I tried to design this to really kind of be right in the middle and speak to both and kind of find the ways that they relate. Also, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Murphy's Law, but I became very acquainted with it this morning with my presentation. So we're going to work through that a little bit together, but I think it'll be good. And then, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So real quick, before I get started, just so I can kind of gauge who I'm talking to, I want to try to make this, for you guys. By a show of hands, how many of you would say that you're like more of a creative person? Anyone? Okay, pretty good. Would the rest of you say I'm more of a technical person or something else? Show of hands? Okay. Maybe about half and half. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to try to, like I said, make this for everybody. Ironically enough, this might not be the most creative of presentations, but I figured, like I said, we'd talk through it and get into some fun stuff. So I titled it A Hacker's Guide to Creative Multimedia, or How to Be Creative for Non-Creative People. I'm Zach Hawkins. So I'm a motion designer by trade, started as a musician. And along the way, if you know anything about motion design, basically you do a little bit of everything. You do music, you do writing, you do graphic design, animation, 3D, photography, cinematography, and you kind of weave it all together. And so people that do this usually will specialize in 1, 2, or 3 things. So it's been an interesting journey to kind of learn a little bit about each of the process of each one and how to weave them together. And if you've tried any of those things, you'll know that they all come with their own independent technical challenges, and they can get as technical as you want. So I felt that was a pretty good way to kind of blend the two together. So here's some pictures of me. It's not very interesting having photos of me designing at a computer. So I figured me up on Table Rock trying to shred was more fun. I'm going to reference my phone here. So I played guitar for 10 years. Started off playing in bands, but wrote, composed, recorded music for like videos and film. Did a little bit of touring. Later, I fell in love with video and like film production and just kind of like learning how to photograph things and shoot. Eventually, as I would shoot things, people would ask me, hey, can you edit that for me? So I then kind of got pulled into editing. Editing led to fixing footage. Like if you have 2 different cameras and like skin tones aren't matching, well, you got to match that so it doesn't look weird. That led to things like making graphics. Then people would say like, hey, can you animate those graphics and bring them to life? That kept going to like visual effects and then eventually to 3D design. And then I started getting better at being able to put all these things together. In addition, so I had also shot some videos, some short films, worked on a couple of feature lengths, nothing super crazy. And then I worked for the Outdoor Channel, which is kind of fun. Let's see here. There we go. So why creativity? Why am I talking about this? Sort of what I alluded to earlier. I'm talking about this because, many professionals are aware of the idea of creep, of like scope and scale creep of a project. Being that you might start off with something and then, hey, can you add this? Can you change that? And before you know it, like your budget's blown or your schedule's blown or any of that. And so creep is technically usually a bad thing. In my case, creep on the macro scale of starting off in music and then having to learn video and then how to edit, it was actually a good thing because like I said earlier, I sort of went through all these different independent creative endeavors that you could deep dive into. You can spend a lifetime learning. I recommend anyone that you really enjoy, you should. But in my case, that macro size creep, like I was talking about, was a good thing. And it led me to kind of just indulge my curiosity and forced me to learn a lot about a bunch of different things and kind of put me out of my comfort zone. So with the exponential increase in content, whether it's video, podcasts, some sort of guides, ebooks, blogs, the list, I kept noticing a two-way street developing between creative people having to become more technical on how they deliver their creativity. Hey, I'm going to make a YouTube video, or I'm going to make this or make that, or I'm going to, try to put this together. You'd have to kind of learn some technical skill sets and put those together. On the flip side, I found a lot of really great creative people with great experiences. Well, okay, now I got to be a storyteller. Now I got to figure out how to talk about this difficult concept and make it in such a way that it's entertaining, that it tracks, and vice versa. So with that being kind of said, I'll be honest, I don't really believe that there's such thing as creative people and technical people. I know we like to think it like that, and I mean, I'm kind of guilty of it myself, but at the end of the day, I would say we are all both. We just have different aptitudes for one kind of over the other. So through the course of this talk, basically, I'm going to challenge you to try to identify which side you feel like you're weakest at, and then challenge you to develop those skills so that you can feed them to the things you are really good at and kind of make that into like a superpower. So what's included and what's not included? I'm not going to give you a tutorial. I don't know how many of you are expecting me to show you how to do something step by step. There's lots of those on YouTube and everywhere else. There are some great stuff out there, but I figured that would be kind of boring. So we're just going to talk about creativity, some techniques, some cool things that came out of it, how technology relates. How do you guys feel about that so far? Okay, cool. I was hoping that you guys were oh, I was expecting you to show me how to do something. Cool. So the importance of creativity, I feel can aid in many things, innovative ideas, building products and services, starting a business, being an entrepreneur, finding ways of inspiring social change and really just sort of changing the world and people around you for the better in the ways that you see fit. I think we all sort of know that. I'm not trying to downplay it. Creativity is a very important thing. And I think we all experience it in different ways. I'll be talking about what creativity is, understanding it, how to stimulate it, how to overcome challenges and roadblocks, how you can develop it, some processes and techniques. And then I'll talk a little bit about creativity in your personal life, in your work life. And then along the way, I'm going to try to relate this all back to technology and science too, just for my technical people out there that want that. And then we'll conclude with Q&A. Cool? All right. I'll probably be checking in with you guys a lot as I go. I meant to write this as very much to speak extemporaneously about this and not read off a script. But I get lost kind of easy sometimes, so I wrote me a pretty in-depth script. Forgive me. So what is creativity? If you don't know, you can look it up or you can ask ChatGPT like I did. Fun fact, I used it to help me write this a little bit. But the basic answer that I think we'll all kind of relate to and get out of is the ability to generate new and valuable ideas, to combine existing ideas in a novel and useful way, how to use our imagination, originality, and see things in a new way. Using creativity involves breaking free of established patterns and thinking and exploring new possibilities. It's vital to the human experience and allows us to imagine, innovate, and shape the world around us. I think we can all agree with that, I hope. So there's some myths about creativity. One, creativity is only for artists. The truth is, creativity is something that everyone can benefit from. As ChatGPT told us, it's vital to our human experience, whether you're an artist, a scientist, engineer, entrepreneur, teacher, all the above. Two, creativity is a talent that you're born with. The truth is, creativity is something that you practice and you develop. It's not this inherent sort of thing that you just have or you don't. Just as other skills, it's something you got to develop, you got to cultivate it, and you got to work on it. Three, creative people are always original. No. Truth is, there's a famous quote about good artists borrow and great artists steal. It's a cool quote. I'll talk about that a little bit later on and like how to steal and all that fun stuff. But yeah, don't be afraid to, ethically steal. Four, creativity requires inspiration. And the truth is about inspiration is it's also a skill that requires practice. It's not some sort of aha moment that you just sort of have. There's a process to that as well. And the better you get at practicing all these, the better you can kind of use them all together. And then the fifth one is creativity is a solitary pursuit. The truth is it's not. Rather, it's many things. You could be learning new things, finding inspiration in places you might not expect, and we'll give you tools and avenues to apply your creativity and ideas to make something truly new and unique. So let's talk about these a little bit. Myth busted. My Mythbusters joke. Lame. All right, so let's consider Brian May. According to the first myth, which is it's only for artists, he's one of the most famous and influential guitar players of all time. Played for Queen, if you don't know. Dude totally rocks. But he's also an astrophysicist and works for NASA and was a team collaborator on the New Horizons Pluto mission, which is pretty rad. Like to think about going from shredding guitar solos to, hey, let's figure out some things about Pluto. We need that. That's pretty rad. Let's see. 3, Vince Gilligan, the writer and creator of Breaking Bad. So in terms of always being original, so there's this interesting story about when he was writing the show Breaking Bad, that he was already out pitching it, and then later learned about this show called Weeds, which had a similar premise of just basically a person in desperation resulting to selling drugs. And he said that he's like, if I would have known that at the time that I was writing, I wouldn't have wrote the show. And if any of you have ever seen Breaking Bad, it's a really good show. And the writing is incredible. So to think that he almost didn't pursue that just because it was kind of close to something that already existed is pretty wild. So I would say if you have an idea or if someone tells you that's too close to something similar, maybe push back a little bit. Make it your own, but don't let that stop you in your tracks. This one's kind of a funny example, but Steve Van Zandt, the dude as Silvio from Sopranos, like a tough guy, he's also a guitar player for Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. So it's like, you can act, you can play guitar, you can do all these things, whether you're Brian May, whether you're a writer, whether you're an actor, doesn't matter. I put this up in result to the solitary pursuit. Creativity is not solitary. It's many things. And sort of relating back to me going through that whole macro creep thing of okay, we're going to do music and design and all these things. It can get a lot, and don't let it overwhelm you, but also don't let it just pigeonhole you, basically. So I want to talk about the creative process a little bit. Everyone has a different process, and that's fine, but basically it can kind of boil down into preparation, incubation, inspiration, evaluation, implementation, and reflection. A lot of shuns. Let's see, preparing your endeavor when you set out, one of the personal favorite items, let me try that again. Jeez. Like I said, I was trying to make this extemporaneously spoken, not reading from a script. So one of my favorite things that I like to refer to and think about and watch frequently is there's this video, it's a TED Talk by Simon Sinek. I'm sure some of you have seen it, but it's about why do you do things? Basically, the talk is, how do leaders inspire great action. And he builds out this cool target, but he says start with why. Figure out your why, because from there you can then figure out how to do something and what that leads to. And he gives all these really great examples. So I highly recommend you watch his talk on that when you get some time. But it's a good way to kind of start your preparation process and sort of give yourself an orientation of like where you're headed and where you want to go. Incubation is a great time to process your thoughts, do research, learn more about the problem you're trying to solve. Once I heard a phrase called learn from dead people, which I think is just like a fancy way of like finding a way to stand on other people's shoulders. But it's a good way to, try to bridge the gap and figure out how other people failed so you can figure out how you want to succeed, whether that's a creative endeavor or that's in a technical endeavor. Excuse me. Inspiration, like I said earlier, it's rarely a eureka moment that just like pops into your head, although I have heard some people have that from time to time. But I don't recommend waiting around for it. Instead, I would recommend try to find ways to inspire, or rather foster your inspiration, like chasing your genuine curiosities. Look for inspiration in many different categories, unique, topics. And the cool thing is you can find ways that they can influence one or the other, and they'll eventually start to stack up. And you'll kind of find that through that, you can start making some really unique and cool things. Then I'll kind of brief through this because I know I only got 40 minutes and I'm not sure how this is going to time out, so I might speed through some of these. But obviously, you want to evaluate the work that you're doing. You want to try to implement it in some sort of way. A lot of like entrepreneurs and people talk about like building a minimum viable product. It's a great idea, even in creativity. Build something simple that at least works. You can always add complexity to it later. I found that complexity usually comes pretty naturally after the fact. So start with something simple and then reflect on it. That's not always something that comes intuitive to creatives. So usually you put your heart and soul into something and someone's like, hey, did you think about XYZ? And you're like, I spent all my time on this. My soul is crushed. I think this is a little bit easier for technical people. They're like, yeah, I built it. Does it work? Did we test it? Oh, it doesn't? Okay, try again. But it's an important part of the process. So I think we should all remember that. I'd like you to consider someone like Philo Farnsworth, if I can speak. I don't know if you guys know who this guy. He was a local Idahoan that basically was credited with developing the television. He found his inspiration working on a potato farm where the story is he like got up on a hill and saw all the lines in the crop field and then saw that the lines you could make like larger images out of them. And then later they applied that lines analogy to shooting lines through a cathode ray on a screen and making a television. Pretty interesting. He did it at 14 and then got started on the television, I think at 21. Pretty cool story. Excuse me. So as I mentioned, basic creative process applies to technical endeavors as well as creative ones. Using your creativity to approach a problem can lead to innovative solutions and solving very difficult problems. Let's see here. A very interesting one also was this kid at the time of the talk. His name is Boron Slot, if I think I'm pronouncing this correctly. He got his inspiration and creativity from nature, where basically he lays out in a TED Talk that he set out to find ways to have the ocean clean itself after hearing about these large trash islands that were appearing out in the oceans, and thought, hey, we should do something about that. That's a big problem. That's a lot of work. What do we do? And looking through the situation and using nature, he found that they're all collecting in these what are called gyres in the ocean. There's like 5 of them. Excuse me. It's where they all kind of collect. And so he could use the nature of the oceanic gyres with nature of a stingray and use the stingray shape to build this device to basically float into these gyres to kind of like help clean itself. And so I don't remember all the exact details. I'll let him tell you in his talk, but finding ways to do that, he was able to cut down the cost and the time to do it like dramatically. It's a very cool story. Creativity can also come from art. In the case of origami, like Japanese folding paper, and making cool sculptures out of it, there was cool engineering applications that people found where they like developed like new shields, like you see on the guy here. so that it's extra strong, but also ways of deploying things like solar panels in space. They found more efficient ways of being able to, pack more solar panels into a shuttle, take it up, get it out there, collect more sun, and using origami, it was kind of a unique approach in how to do that. Another unique thing was MC Escher using things like tessellations, or what's more referred to as like tiling. On the left, he used math to develop these really cool patterns to create cool works of art. But then you start looking into more like tessellations, and you can use things like honeycomb structures. And that's used a lot in aerospace. So you can make things really lightweight, but also extra strong. So, kind of the back and forth between creativity, art, technical stuff, engineering, and kind of how they go back and forth and influence each other, I think is pretty cool. Another one is Benoit Mandelbrot developing his Mandelbrot sets to come up with like fractal geometry. Makes really cool art, but you can also use it to develop more powerful like antennas, transistors, I believe like microwaves and a few other things. They were able to use this same sort of basic shape to develop new ways of implementing an already existing technology. Yeah, like an antenna. Heat exchangers was another one. It's kind of cool. So let's talk about stimulating creativity. So this one is something, like I said, it's something that you're going to have to practice. You can't be good at something if you never do it. But practicing comes in lots of different ways. There's lots of really cool exercises you can do. Practice. One of my favorite videos that I refer to quite frequently, I try to at least watch like once a year, twice a year. It fires me up. But it's called How to Be Creative, How an Artist Turns Pro. And so the video delves into the idea that really to do anything, you have to practice it, and that sometimes you're not always going to be pro. It's not like this static thing that you achieve. Some days you can be pro, the next day you can be an amateur, and then the next day you can be a pro again. And it comes down to doing a process, practicing it, just going through that. And in the case that they bring up, it's just like sitting down and writing. Like you might not have your muses that day, so you might not sit down and say, oh, I'm just going to write this beautiful story, or I'm not going to develop this great thing. But it's the act of sitting down and just doing the work is usually when those muses come. Really great thing. In the video, it's pretty funny. There's this interview where George R.R. Martin talks to Stephen King, and he specifically asks, like, how do you write so fast? If you don't know, George R.R. Martin created Game of Thrones and is a little slow. Really good, but really slow. But basically, he says the same thing. He's like, you sit down and you got to do it. You just got to sit down and you got to write. So like I said earlier, inspiration doesn't normally come in eureka moments. So that's why you practice it. Let's see. Again, I'm trying to not read as much. I want to more or less interact with you guys, but I don't want to miss anything. Let's see here. A funny thing that I learned about inspiration was, so I started off in music, and normally what would happen is in music, I would find myself trying to recreate feelings that I already heard in other music. Like I'd listen to a song, it generated a feeling. That's a cool feeling. I like that. And I would try to recreate that when writing. So then when I got into more like video and design and things like that, I wasn't necessarily going through the inspiration step quite like that. And then it was sort of a recent aha moment for me was the actual idea of practicing your inspiration, building up resources, building up libraries, finding out who has like good taste, and then collecting these so you can reference back to them quickly. So when you're challenged with a project and, hey, we got to come up with this thing, technical or creative, you can go back to it and you can know that, oh, well, I've got a whole spot of great ideas I can reference back to. And then the act of constantly practicing that, looking out and finding ways to collect them. This is actually my Pinterest account. I've got a bunch of really random stuff up there, but Pinterest is actually a really good option for that. It's not unbeknownst to me, it's not just like recipes and like how to decorate your living room. I don't know if you knew that. So earlier we talked about like stealing like an artist. There's a really great book called Steal Like an Artist, which I highly recommend that you read. There's a couple outlines which I'll just sort of briefly go over, but one is study the work of others, sort of what I talked about earlier. Find people with good taste, study them, find out what they're doing, try to copy them without directly copying them, but try to understand their technique. You can remix and repurpose things, sort of mixing and matching. Similar was create a mashup. You can combine different ideas and styles and mediums and come out with some really unique outputs. Another one was using constraints. I think people in engineering and more science-based endeavors, they have very hard constraints most of the time. In creativity or more creative endeavors, it's not as easy, but by limiting yourself by like how many colors you can use, or if you're trying to create music, there's so many instruments out there. It's like, okay, no, we're only going to use drums, bass, guitar, keyboard, something like that. So creating these false constraints can actually force you to come up with unique ways that still getting to your end outcome. And then the last one, as you probably intuitively would know, is collaborating with other artists, other people, develop new ideas, talk to other people, ask them things. One of my favorite things to do is if I think I know the answer to someone or to something, I will go to someone that knows a lot about it and I'll ask them a question that I feel like I already know the answer to, just to see if they give me something different or new, or if they kind of blow my mind in a unique way. And then usually that'll spur a conversation and research, or learning a new technique of how to do something. Earlier with inspiration, exploring new ideas. I talked about like the macro-sized creep that I experienced. You want to cultivate this. I would say try to get creative and new hobbies. Read new things. Read books. Try new things. Like go out of your way. Put yourself out of your comfort zone actively. Not just like, oh, I did that one thing and I wasn't comfortable. Like, no, try to do it. Example, I'm up here giving a talk. I haven't given a talk in a while. I don't know how well I'm doing, but I might be failing. It's fine. But put yourself out of your comfort zone and try these new things. And like I said, you can find ways that they can enhance your creativity and do other things. Oh, yeah. That was a meme. That was part of the collaborate part. Let's see. How are we doing on time? You know? Sorry, how much time do I have left? Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm just, like I said, trying to gauge how I'm going. Brainstorm, we're gonna skip through some of these. I might go off script here a little bit. I want this to be interesting. Like I said, I'm trying to cater this to you guys. So in design, something that's kind of interesting is one of the processes that you'll do is you can come up with multiple ideas to a solution. For example, this project, they were doing an ad for T-Mobile. And so when presenting with the client, like, hey, we're going to make this ad, here's your constraints of, this color, this messaging, blah, 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 blah. What they would do is actually develop a few ideas, not spend a ton of time into them, similar to that minimum viable product like we talked about, but present it to them and just see kind of like what resonates with them. Like, oh yeah, I really like that one. The very, very pink one, dope. I like that. Let's do that. Okay, cool. Make it really pink. Make it have attitude, like whatever. We use this in design to, not spend too much time on a thing, use our time and resources and budget wisely, but also, again, try to make sure that we hit our end goals. Let's see. We'll skip that a little bit. Some techniques. I spent a lot of time kind of going through some of these. So like I said, I might skip through some of these. If you have questions, talk to me after the thing. I'll give you more information than you want to know. But some techniques would be like reverse thinking, working from a problem backwards. Usually you can find interesting ways of how you got there. I know in my case, like I might start at I want to start at this end thing. How did I get there? Well, I got there either through this, or maybe I got through that. Oh, okay. And you can kind of like branch out in a bunch of ways until you eventually make it back to the first step, and then they sort of collapse down to step one. Another thing is mind mapping, just getting your ideas out on paper and then finding how they relate. Also a very useful step, very beneficial. One of my favorites is forced connections, which is kind of the concept of like taking two different ideas and finding ways and how they relate, even though they might seem juxtaposed. The the farther away they get, it can seem harder, but some of the most interesting ideas come from some of those really wacky, like, how did you get from this to that? And then finding the unique ways in which they connect. Some examples I'd say are like Netflix, Airbnb, and Velcro. When I asked ChatGPT earlier, I said, what are some examples of forced connections? These are some that it brought up. Basically, the idea of Netflix being like, hey, I like the idea of gym membership subscriptions. I don't like late fees. That sucks. Well, maybe we could kind of, bridge those two ideas together. And I'm sure you've probably heard of it. Airbnb is similar sort of thing. Some people were like trying to, raise some money. They had like a bunch of mattresses on their living room floor. And so they rented it out. And then they partnered that with the idea of like, how do we solve for like short-term rentals? And like maybe people can rent out their own house and solve short-term rentals, and you can make some money doing it. And kind of bringing that with like, an online marketplace. Velcro, let's see here in my notes. Basically, it was a Swiss engineer that was out running with his dog and found these like burrs sticking to the dog's fur, and then thought that was a kind of a unique way to like create a fastener. So sort of like earlier when we said pull from nature, he used that and said, oh, well, maybe we can make a way to fasten these things. Kind of an interesting idea. So let's talk about overcoming creative blocks. Do you ever feel like you just get stuck and like can't kind of move? Feel free to shout out, by the way. Like, okay, cool. Like a lot? Yeah. Okay, fair enough. And writing this whole talk, I actually had it multiple times. I'm not gonna lie, creative blocks suck. So you do got to find ways to overcome them. There are several techniques. So I'll go through a few and then we can kind of talk about some of them a little bit. I think some of these get kind of interesting. One is take a break. I know that sounds like really dumb and simple, but like, don't look at your screen, get out, go for a walk. I was out walking at like 2 a.m. last night, getting this stuff done. Try not to actively think about something, and sometimes your subconscious actually will generate a solution, which is pretty cool. Other versions of this could be things like meditation, working out, yoga. I have found success in this in terms of like you can generate different chemicals in your brain when you're not thinking about it, you're doing something else. You can have this kind of help on your brain, and then before you know it, you're like, oh, well, what about this? Can be a good way to stimulate some creativity. Another way is to, change the chemicals in your brain. So that would be, either through working out or things like that. Something else could be like, cutting out sugar for a week or something like that. These are kind of smaller things you can do. The next one I think is a little bit more, a lot of people are like, do you take drugs? I'm not gonna, first and foremost, disclaimer, I'm not saying go out and take drugs. I'm not saying break the laws. What you do with your body is your choice as far as I'm concerned. But I think there are some interesting examples that kind of come from this idea of do you or don't you? Ernest Hemingway has this very famous quote associated with him, which I actually found wasn't from him, but the idea kind of reigns interesting, that you write drunk and then you edit sober. Have any of you heard that before? I don't know how well that works in engineering. Probably not very good. But in creative endeavors, there are some examples of that, like working pretty good. Stephen King does not remember writing the book Cujo because he was drunk and high on cocaine the entire time, just like blacked out. I don't know. I didn't really like Cujo that much, but I thought it was interesting. An argument against it would be David Crosby, originally of the Byrds, and then later on in Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He's come out as saying, he's like, no, I've used drugs. They're fun. They don't help your creative process. They get in the way and they can stifle it. Guy's got a pretty good track record of making good stuff. He's probably done some more wild stuff than I have, so I tend to think that there might be something to that. Another interesting example is Richard Feynman, the physicist. He's a Nobel Prize winner. He contributed on the Manhattan Project. He was also, interestingly enough, one of the first people to propose like quantum computing and using quantum phenomenon to use that to make a computing process. Dude also loved to smoke marijuana, liked ketamine, and kind of uses LSD from time to time. So, maybe. Another very interesting person is Carey Mullis. He's a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry and had very significant contributions in PCR testing. Also did work in like microbiology and genetics. The guy would synthesize his own LSD, and then he believed they had mind-opening experiences. So, we have some people that have done some very incredible things. So again, I'm not going to say, hey, go do what they did, but I can't say that they didn't have good success because they clearly won some Nobel Prizes and made some pretty significant contributions. This is Carey Mullis in his TED Talk. Highly recommend it. Basically, he talks about how they made a pig heart compatible with humans. And like, there's this whole thing about the enzymes and how you do this. And brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It's very short and the dude is hilarious. Very, very interesting. Another common thing is to change your environment. Excuse me. This can be things like, moving your office or rearranging it, or in some cases, people, you want to, be famous, musician or actor or something. Like, move to Hollywood. So like, there's this whole like, you can move somewhere, you can change things around. I think there's probably something to this. Creativity is bred differently in different areas. And by moving and changing your environment, you can stimulate that in different ways. Surround yourself with new people. It's pretty cool. I like it. An interesting one, though, is I don't know if you have heard of this guy. This guy, Brendan Small, he created this cartoon called Metalocalypse. Very entertaining, very silly. Juxtapose the idea of a very famous band that's also a super heavy band, and it's a silly show. But basically, Brendan, so he's a showrunner, creator. He's also a writer. He also wrote and performed all the music for it and had many hats in this show. And it was a very successful show. So someone that kind of practiced the whole, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. An interesting thing that I found that he talked about, he said literally change your environment, where he would, throughout his working day, he would just get up and take his team with him, and they'd go to another conference room or another office, work for an hour, get up, go to another conference room for a couple hours, and they just kind of keep moving throughout their like offices throughout the day, which I thought was kind of interesting. I have used that a little bit myself. It's kind of nice. So as I previously mentioned, one way is you can ask ChatGPT, which, like I said, I did. I didn't go quite with this entire framework because I wasn't sure how I was going to play on time. But this was what it spit out for me. And then that's a mind map I created to try to bridge all these ideas together. I don't expect you guys to read it. It's a bunch of stuff I was just throwing out there, and you might see some lines and how they relate to each other. Excuse me. So let's talk about developing and incorporating creativity. Basically things like, embracing your curiosity. You're going to want to cultivate a growth mindset. And like I said earlier, you're going to actively go out and get into hobbies and activities. Let's see. One of the simplest ways about embracing your curiosity is asking questions, following your passions. If someone kind of like, triggers something in your mind about like, oh, I wonder about that, follow it. Just see where it goes. Like I said earlier, even if you think you know the answer, it could be kind of interesting to ask someone something you think you know the answer to, and they give you something completely different. Like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't think of it like that. Another thing is like try new things. So like take classes, like go out of your way, try to actively learn new things, read books, listen to interesting podcasts, watch movies, stuff that you all probably already know and already do, but it's worth mentioning. You should do it. Cultivating a growth mindset. I think this is something that speaks to, creative people and technical people. You want to find ways and areas that you can develop within, specifically things that I think stand out and have done well for me that I think translate to virtually everyone would be how can you develop personally, how you can develop physically, professionally, creatively, and technically. As I mentioned earlier, I think you can find ways that they relate into one another, and you might be surprised on how they might kind of spark new ways to help what you're working on. There's also a bunch of great resources, Khan Academy, Udemy, YouTube, Skillshare, stuff like that. Utilize that. There's great stuff out there, like a lot. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. Another thing too, like I said, with hobbies and activities, like I said, try drawing or painting or some sort of like visual thing. Try sculpting something. Try creative writing or doing photography. If you've never done music, try music. Or cooking, baking, distilling, mixology. I don't know. I mean, just like pick something that's like kind of fun. Gardening. I don't know. That's kind of cool. You can learn things from that. So the other thing is developing a process. I talked a little bit earlier about the creative process, which again is kind of different for everyone. I do highly recommend that you look into your own, try to tweak or optimize, but also look into other processes and how they might relate to yours, how that might influence you and how you can change it. For me, an aha moment I had was when I looked into the design process versus just like a creative process, which I'm not going to necessarily go through every single step, but basically it has to deal with, empathizing with your customer or your user, trying to understand where they're actually coming from on the most fundamental level. Define your goals and objectives so you know what you're aiming for. Do research into other approaches, how people succeeded, how they failed, how you can ideate on how, on some of these fresh approaches, how you might be able to rearrange them and put them together in new and interesting ways. Build a prototype, do some sort of minimum viable, just get something, even if it's just to point out, be like, dude, that sucks. Try again. Like, okay, what part about it sucks? Oh, that. Okay, cool. Like that can be a very useful thing, especially when talking about something as big and nebulous as like creativity. It's nice to have something to look and point at. And then lastly, like I said earlier, you definitely want to evaluate, ask for feedback, which is why I've been asking you guys how you feel about this. Like I want to make sure this goes for you, but the same goes with the other endeavors. Ask and solicit that feedback. Have someone tell you something that maybe you didn't quite realize was happening. It can often generate a better result. We talked about multiple, excuse me, dry throat. Talked about multiple processes. This one I thought was interesting. I was doing research on creative writing and like, okay, so like I got a camera. I want to make a movie. I want to make something cool. Crap, I got to write a story. I don't know much about writing. Let's figure out how to write a little bit. And so as I did it, I learned that there's 3 really unique approaches to writing. One is Dan Harmon's Story Circle. I don't know if you know who Dan Harmon is, but he's one of the co-creators of Rick and Morty. Very funny show. But the Story Circle is a very interesting formula to kind of apply to some of your favorite stories. You can go through each step and see how it fits right in. Some of the language might change a little bit, but it's basically all right lockstep. Another interesting one, the guy's got a really good book, but it's by a guy named Blake Snyder, and his formula is called Save the Cat. Similar kind of thing. I don't necessarily know all the plot points like beat by beat, but you can look up various Save the Cat formulas. The middle one is from a company and an app and a website called Studio Binder. And you can like download this template and plug your own stories into it and see how it all fits in. But it's cool how you can kind of like really see how you can make something interesting from creative writing. It's not just, oh, this guy did this thing and then that happened. Like it's not quite like that. The last one is Freytag's Pyramid. Similar sort of thing. You can talk about like how you start, how you build up, use rising action to get to a climax, and then how you use the falling action to kind of build a resolve and feel that like sense of resolution at the end, that you know why things happened, why it was so exciting, and then you can leave walking away with the sense of resolve. I feel like that answered the main questions. Or in some of my favorite cases, it can leave you asking more questions about like, oh, well, what would have happened if this would have happened or that? Movies and shows and books, things that leave you asking questions is generally a good idea. Experiment and fail. Similar to what I said with this talk, I haven't given a talk in a while. I might be failing miserably right now. We'll see. But I was going to experiment. I was going to find out. So hopefully I get some good feedback at the end and you tell me if I completely ate it or not. let's see here again. Skip. Boring. So like, I'll just sort of read. So at some point, you want to develop a prototype of your idea or your concept. You want to see how well or poorly it does. So at some point you got to try it out. A lot of people in startup culture talk about like, failing forward and things like that. I'm sure you've all heard similar things. So I'm not going to bore you with stuff that you've probably already heard. But I do recommend that at some point you just got to do, even if it's scary. Here's some photos of me in high school. I figured I'd tell a brief story about failing. This is one of the worst failures I ever had. It's hilarious, but also it taught me a lot. So basically, the first time I was ever performing live in front of an audience, it was in front of like 600 people at my elementary school. we were playing at a talent show. And the band that I was in, we were going to perform Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix. Great song. We practiced it over and over again, and we had it very dialed in. Like, we were ready to do this song. I am going to add, we left out the solo. I don't know if you know this. Jimi Hendrix is pretty hard to play, especially for a 12-year-old. But anyway, I digress. But what was funny about it is, what we didn't plan on is that we kind of cued the transitions of the songs to the lyrics. And so what happened was, the third verse, I just blanked out and I totally forgot all the words immediately. I was like, oh yeah, we get to this part. And then before I know it, it's like, oh crap. Not only did I mess up and I don't know what I'm about to say next, but now the rest of the band has no idea what's going to happen next. So like, here we go. Luckily, I just sort of kind of like kept strumming through it, like red-faced, all embarrassed. And my drummer thought it was a good time. He's like, drum solo, let's do this. And sure enough, it worked out pretty well. We ended up rocking it out and playing to all the little kids. It was fun. Funny story. Some other stories about experimenting and failing. These are, I think they're probably less embarrassing than forgetting the words to Purple Haze, but probably more interesting too. So one was like Post-it notes. The engineer that invented that, he set out to invent this like super strong adhesive, and it didn't work. It's not a strong adhesive at all, but he found a way to repurpose it in the sense that it didn't leave any residue. So he was able to make something like a Post-it note, which, as you probably know, was a very commercial success. WD-40, designed to be a popular lubricant by the Rocket Chemical Company to displace water. WD is water displacement. 40 is their 40th attempt. They failed 40 times before they could get it right. I know you guys heard the whole like light bulb and Thomas Edison story. I skipped that one because I was trying to come up with new ideas. Again, these are ones that ChatGPT spit out for me. So I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. I'm going to skip that one. That was funny. A pretty interesting one that I actually didn't know that much about until later was one from General Mills and Betty Crocker. In the 1950s, General Mills launched to set out like a new line of cake mixes. And the problem was they made it so simple that all you had to do was add water and it flopped. Like no one bought it. At the time, homemakers were doing all this laborious labor to try to make a great cake mix. And they found it so easy that like they kind of felt, I guess, like guilty about it and just wasn't working. So the company partnered with psychologists and discovered that, well, maybe if you add an egg to it, people will find like that to be more like working. So they added an egg to it and it worked. Like it flew off the shelves. Another one was like the Apple Newton, their first basically version of the iPhone in 1993, had a stylus. Did not do very well. Steve Jobs came back in 97. It's like, no, we're going to scrap that. But, they kept working on it and came up with these. Pretty cool. Are we short on time? 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to shut up. All right, we're going to leave it at that. Does anyone have any questions? Or do you want to talk about anything? Or like, is there anything? Yeah, any input or questions? Okay.
You mentioned a creep in your career, how you sort of just got into music and you went into the next thing and next thing. What's next for you? What are you looking for? And like, what do you think is the next creep in your path?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kind of how I got partnered with Sean and other people here at Hack For It. I was very interested in like engineering and technology and how it influenced my creativity. So I'd say next, I'm trying to find ways to blend the two together as much as I can. I bought a 3D printer. We're gonna try to print things. Maybe I'll partner with people here and like, hey, let's program this thing and like put it into this body that we printed, and probably try to push those boundaries a little bit and see where that takes me. Good question. Mike, did you have one?
I remember years ago, you and I talked about feeling like creatively blocked at one point. Like, for example, myself, I play piano, but for a long time, I don't, and there's like dust that grows on it. And I feel like shame for not doing it more.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on like dealing with like shame for not being creative more often or something like that?
Yeah, I would say use that shame. Let it build up inside of you until you hate yourself so much that you've got to go back to it and try again. Honestly, I've also, in the instance of piano, I found that if I've taken several months away from playing music, if I go back to it, usually the first little bit's kind of rusty, but then I usually end up being way better than I ever was. I've heard other people way better than I at music also mention this, so I think there's something to it. I think that also speaks to like the taking breaks. Sometimes it's months, but yeah, try to use that to like get back into it. But yeah, also don't let it stop you. Anyone else? Sorry, I realized this went on a little long. Yes, sir.
So it sounded like you wanted some feedback on how your presentation went. And
Sure.
I thought you did okay. Yeah.
All right. Hey, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, feedback's important. I had a question about using Chat GPT. It's a big.
Sure.
It's on the news. It's going to come kill us all.
We're all dead.
But how are you using it? I noticed you used it quite a bit in your presentation, and I've been using it, for different things, for some, writing, like I don't want to write that. It's probably out there anyway. It's like, to me, it's like it's smart copy and paste,
Yeah.
kind of. But you showed one thing up there that was a Chat GPT about creativity, and then there was a mind map next to it. It's not, you able to generate the mind map directly from the Chat GPT bullet points, whatever that was?
In that case, no. I used ChatGPT to generate a list, and then I kind of mind mapped out of that. But to kind of speak to, I'm sure there is some AI tools that will do mind mapping for you. I might not know them off the top of my head. But to kind of what you're saying, I mean, I would say like it's kind of sad to think of a world where humans aren't doing all the creativity. But I think there's some great power in using these tools to kind of help you get over the hump, help, get rid of creative block, or just sort of make sure you're right on track. I actually had a lot of this written first. And then at the end, I started thinking like, oh, am I forgetting something? If I don't talk about this, are they going to like call me out on it? So I used it as a way to sort of check me and just make sure I was hitting a lot of the things. So I think it's a kind of going back and forth. Use it to help, but don't lean too hard.
Good.
All right, Zach, thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah. If you have any other questions, talk to me at the end.
Yeah. If you have any more questions, definitely hit up Zach in the hallway.
Cool.
Thanks again, man.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's fun to be here. Thank you all for coming out.